Thank you very much, Francisco. So, any question to Francisco Delico? Yeah, please.
How much contact was there between these various populations that were spread over the Eurasian continent?
Yeah, well, this is a good question. Paleoanthropology is at present, from the genetic point of view, we don't have a lot of data from Africa because DNA does not preserve in Africa very well, but we start having some clues. From an anthropological point of view, apparently there was certainly contact in Africa between this population between 300,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago. So when modern human came out of Africa 60,000 years ago, there was clearly modern humans. Okay, so this is, I would say, a first continuous contact within Africa, but this continues chronologically, with some population coming into contact at some moment and having no contact in other moment. And when modern human came out of Africa, now paleogenetic evidence suggested the interbreeding with local archaic populations such as Neanderthal, Denisova was quite systematic. That was not the idea at the beginning when, for the first time, we know Svante Pääbo. This is clearly is a very change in paradigm. Because in the first paper published in Cell, the differences between Neanderthal and modern human were seen as so important that the same motto that 20 years later said where modern humans and the Neanderthal interbreed, let's say, promote the idea that there was clearly different species. So while in fact we know that there was a lot of exchange and even between the archaic themselves. For example, Denisova was not an homogeneous population, and they did not gain the same genetic input to the present modern humans. So we know that there was two different groups of Denisova. So there was clearly contact, I would say, quite systematic contact.
But how about Indonesia? As it apparently was earlier than Lascaux and all those things. Did they invent this in parallel?
Okay, so your question is now not about the population biologically, but the population, the innovation culturally. Yeah. I don't think that anybody has a clear explanation of why the earliest site with depictional images in Indonesia occurred in Indonesia. So we don't know. It could be a
why not?
Independent evolution of the population. In the paper, in the several papers published in Nature, they said they certainly were modern humans producing this and brought an innovation in Indonesia. But in fact, certainly these people were modern human, but with a large genetic input from Denisovan, because these present day people have up to 6% of Denisovan. So it was a population that on their way out of Africa arrived there, mixed with Denisovan, and they created something new. As modern human arriving in Europe creates something new. And there is no reason for thinking that these two populations were in contact when they produced this innovation.
Thank you.
Oui. D'abord, je voudrais te féliciter, Francesco, nous sommes à peu près du même année, sur les trajectoires indépendantes. Ça, c'est le point fondamental de ces différentes innovations qui constituent chaque fois des schémas évolutifs, mais dont la structure n'est pas anodine. Je veux dire, l'apparition de ces différents éléments semble impliquer dans un processus structuré. Il y a ceci d'abord, puis ceci ensuite, et ainsi de suite. Par contre, le fait que ça puisse être indépendant me paraît très bien démontré. Et ça signifie qu'il n'est pas nécessaire d'attendre la sortie d'Afrique pour que ça existe ailleurs. À mon avis, cette sortie d'Afrique moderne rentre dans la mythologie scientifique actuelle, quoi, comme tu l'as montré. Mais ce qui est important, c'est de voir que, par exemple, l'apparition d'images suit l'utilisation de l'ocre, comme elle-même suit l'utilisation des matières osseuses, et ainsi de suite, comme les sépultures elles-mêmes marquent un temps, pas du point de vue des datations, mais du point de vue de la structure, de ces agencements, si je puis dire, ces agencements chronologiques. Donc je pense que le temps est venu de dépasser cet aspect aléatoire des découvertes, et bien de leur donner une signification dans un mécanisme qui lui a un sens, qui lui a une cohérence logique. Donc, je pense qu'on doit distinguer les deux. Et qu'en même temps, pour moi, comme tu sais, je ne vois pas l'Afrique comme étant le berceau de l'homme moderne, mais plutôt toute une série de choses. Tu as fait allusion tout à l'heure. On a découvert en Chine récemment, où Chris Ringer parle, lui, de phylum indépendant. Il essaye d'esquiver le terme d'évolution indépendante, de phylum, pourquoi pas. Donc, je pense qu'on doit garder à l'esprit ouvert. D'un côté, la structuration chronologique de ces découvertes et en même temps, l'indépendance de l'Asie par rapport à l'Afrique. Donc, c'est plutôt, je suis tout à fait de ton avis de manière générale. Et il y a une chose, tu as fait allusion, et là c'est plutôt une question, à l'impact des changements environnementaux dans cette évolution. Moi, je ne suis pas très convaincu parce qu'il me semble que nous avons plutôt affaire à une dynamique spirituelle, une dynamique propre à l'homme et dans l'homme qui explique toutes ces découvertes et toutes ces modifications. Et je vois mal où tu placerais les éventuels impacts des modifications climatiques.
Oui, should I summarize the question in English or I would answer that in French? Okay, well,
briefly, if possible. Very briefly.
Both Italian, including Italian and Spanish. Okay, but the question that Marcel raised is so okay. First, he says okay, there is some trend, common trend, and development, ochre use, for example, in Europe and Africa, etc. At the same time. So there is a logic in the arrival of these various innovations. But this question concerns the potential impact of climate change in the process. Okay, so our view is that these different population at regional scale face every time that the climatic change arrives a challenge. So you can respond to this challenge in different ways. The first way is you can disappear. Okay. The second is that you try to keep doing the same thing that you were already doing. Another possibility is that you face the challenge by innovating and creating something new. So at this moment in which you may have an exaptation, so you can reuse in previous innovation for something different. These exaptation are not only technological, could be of different way, could be your way in which you organize yourself, your social organization and so on. And we have also tried to, in fact, put these hypotheses at work by applying what we call the eco-culture niche model. So these are algorithms that are used, come from ecology, and you can use, combine climatic modeling and the location of the different sites and see how, by modeling a climate change, the new population is expanding or keeping the same ecological footprint, or in some cases even reducing that. So this could be a way to test the hypothesis. For example, we published a paper in the PNAS in which we test that with the transition between the Still Bay, which is a phase between 70,000, 75,000, and the Oysonsport to see what happened between the two, and show that with the Oysonsport we have an expansion of the niche. So this would be perhaps in conjunction with the first use of bows and arrows. So it's but the fact is, so you are right saying that there is a logic in this innovation, but at the same time, we see that for a very large period in very numerous regions, we don't have this innovation occurring. So it's looked at the same time, there is a process, but this process does not seem to affect everybody. So we have to try to understand what is the logic, bringing population to the next step in one place and not in the other. So that is
thank you.
Is the challenge.
To my point of view, excuse me, I just reply. To my point of view, the challenge is not that much towards environment changes, but toward ourselves. The challenges are in our mind. And that's how we involve. We don't need the change in environment, but the changes are in our mind. As soon as we discover something, there is a pressure to discover something more, something else. That's how the human mind works.
This is an hypothesis that you need to test.
Marcel, Marcel, je pondérerai, comme tu sais. Il est sûr que depuis que la culture est apparue, elle peut avoir sa vitesse personnelle, intime, et elle est très importante. Ceci dit, les changements climatiques ont joué considérablement avant. C'est ce qui a fait toute l'évolution que nous voyons a posteriori. Mais il n'empêche que les changements climatiques ont toujours eu une importance dans toutes les situations humaines.
C'est ton point de vue, Yves.
Oui, absolument. C'est pour ça que je l'exprime. Par ailleurs, il faut aussi penser que Homo sapiens, c'est une réalité biologique. C'est pas Homo sapiens, c'est pas quelqu'un qui est lié à une certaine culture. Homo sapiens, on sait ce qu'il est sur le plan de l'ADN et il ne faut pas le faire apparaître n'importe où. L'Homo sapiens apparaît incontestablement en Afrique et en Afrique seulement, forcément, il a une origine. Et l'histoire de l'homologie de Chine est beaucoup plus liée de manière extrêmement logique au denisovien. C'est à la fois logique sur le plan géographique et aussi génétique. Donc, il ne faut pas mélanger la culture et la biologie. Attention, Marcel, on t'a à l'œil. D'autres questions? Any question to
Yes.
Francesco?
I just wanted to comment more than question. You always learn something so much new from listening to Francesco, but how accurate do you think these dates are in Southeast Asia? And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, what was the influence, you think, culturally on Neanderthals when sapiens came in from Africa?
Well, about the dating is, I would say, relatively robust in the case of the dating from Southeast Asia. This technique, or the uranium-thorium dating of the stalagmite, particularly the calcitic layer, is pure enough. It's something that is widespread, not only in archaeology, but in fact in its origin is mostly about paleoclimatology and study of the stalagmite and so on. The curious thing is that when the same technique is applied to a site in Europe, and this concern a more, I would say, controversial issue about Neanderthal, the data are put in question, and when in fact is done in Southeast Asia, where people think that they were modern humans, nobody discussed the methods. And so I would say the dates, of course, there is not a radiocarbon, there is a large margin of error, but I think that the dates obtained are quite reliable. It's the same techniques, in fact, that was used for Bruniquel. At Bruniquel, the good thing is that the Neanderthal not only broke the stalagmite, but there was new layer of stalagmite growing on top of the broken pieces, which allow the researcher to precisely date when the stalagmite was broken by dating the new layers on top of that. So I would say that is quite precise. About I don't know whether I understood correctly the question, but what are the differences between Neanderthal and modern human arriving in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Neanderthals were very widespread for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
We're the species that has survived. I mean, we have some Neanderthal genes, of course, probably all of us in this room. Maybe some more than others.
Probably all.
But all. And I just wondered what you thought about cultural innovations that may have influenced the demise of Neanderthals and the disappearance of Neanderthals.
Yeah, the issue is the demise of Neanderthal, what kind of factor or cause. So they could be many, including epidemiologic. This demise did not happen very suddenly. we know that modern human and Neanderthal coexist in Europe for a relatively long time. So it was not such a, and it could be slightly small changes in a number of domains. Could be a technological innovation, could be a different social organization, putting, for example, modern human more in contact with the Neanderthal community. We know that the Neanderthal community was relatively local. So a very tiny change in social organization and technology may produce in the long run the replacement of the local population. So one do not really need a profound cognitive divide to produce the change. I mean, as we know, because when the European came out of Europe in the 14th century, they colonized almost everybody and killed most of the people living around. And I'm not sure that we were cognitively more advanced at that time than we are now. And the other were, you know, has incredible tradition, mythology, rock art, etc. So you don't need to be very smart to replace the other. Sometimes it's the opposite.
Yeah. Now, you also, when you talked about shells and beads, you talked about Morocco and South Africa. And you know the work of Curtis Marion, who thinks that there was a period of time when there were refugia in Africa. And he picks the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, the southern coast of Africa, and perhaps even the highlands of the Horn of Africa. And I wondered how you felt about that suggestion.
Well, the idea that Curtis Marion has proposed is that one of the ideas is that there was a special situation in Southern Africa leading to a very particular cultural adaptation of modern human living there, connected with the sea level change and the opening of new landscape, etc. But we published 2 years ago, a paper in which we show that Neanderthals in Portugal were doing the same during the last intervention. So they have a very intense exploitation of marine resources. Unfortunately, because of sea level change, probably most of the Neanderthal sites have disappeared. But there are cases in which we show that there was so this coastal adaptation apparently is not something peculiar of modern human living in South Africa, but probably is also something that we can see elsewhere among archaic hominins.
Yeah, I just wanted to remark on the fact that the work that's going on in terms of sapiens and Neanderthals, if I were starting, and I started paleoanthropology 50 years ago, this is, to me, one of the most exciting intersections for this conference. That there is evidence now of the various things you've talked about, like the use of ochre. And I myself have experienced attending a Maasai wedding. And really, you know, you feel as the outsider when you're in the middle of a Maasai wedding. But as soon as that Maasai woman reaches out and touches your face to paint it, you become inside and you feel that you are welcome. And there's an intimacy that develops because with the early use of ochre, I think they didn't have mirrors. So if they were doing any fancy sort of decorating, they would have done that. And this would reinforce enormously social interactions between individuals. But if I were going into paleoanthropology, this is the period that I would be most fascinated with.
You are still a young scholar. You can join us and study
Thank you.
at the Stone Age. You will be very well welcome.
And a very nice paper. Thank you.
Francesco, thank you very much.